Welcome back to another North Carolina Tar Heels basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're watching us on our rapidly growing YouTube channel, that is called Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is our director of basketball recruiting and analyst, longtime AAU college and high school coach, Mr. David Sisk. And a quick reminder, you can follow us on Facebook, Tar Heel Illustrated. You can follow us on Twitter at Heel Illustrated, no S there in the middle, at Heel Illustrated. And of course, we are TarHeelIllustrated.com. For just $8.33 a month, you can be a Carolina expert too. So David, we're going to get some of your expertise tonight, and we're just basically going to have a generic conversation. The first 4 days of the tournament are over. I got a chance to actually watch first round games for the first time in 20 years, like all of them, because I'm always covering stuff. And for people who don't know, when you cover the tournament, you don't get to see a lot of the rest of the tournament other than what you're covering. So for me, it was fascinating to sit back starting at noon on Thursday and watch everything up till midnight or so last night. We're recording this on Monday with Gonzaga and TCU. I'm a basketball junkie, so I love watching the games, but also I'm taking mental notes about, what is wrong with North Carolina? Why did this team underachieve so much? Why are there so many glaring warts with this club that I'm not finding as much with these other teams? And so we're going to kind of hit on that, maybe a little bit of ACC stuff, and we're going to talk Hubert Davis. We've had 10 days, 11 days now to absorb the end of the Tar Heel season. And for me, it's given me an opportunity as I've been digging up information, stuff for our Tidbit series that we're running on the site, that just kind of highlights a lot of things I already knew. So we're just going to have a free-for-all here and no holds barred conversation, which I know excites David. So David, your thoughts just on the first 4 days of the tournament and kind of how it relates to Carolina, a little bit what we were hitting on a little bit before I hit the record button.
Well, there's a lot of parity and obviously a lot of really good teams out there. And we've always said this, man, there's just millions of good basketball players that are out there. And you get the right combination of 4 or 5 and you can end up playing deep into March. And I think this is a perfect example. Very deep field. I think I don't know that you got that many teams that stand out. So you're just looking at the competitive aspect of it, across the board, really even, I think. And, how it relates to North Carolina, I just think you see the athleticism more than anything. Excuse me, a lot of teams haven't shot well in this tournament. And, you look at North Carolina and they didn't shoot well, but these other teams can fall back on their defense when that doesn't happen. So I just think looking at the defense, the energy, the intensity, how teams can get at it on that end, and just a mesh between inside play and outside play where it's not two separate things, but it works together. Those are the kind of things that I've noticed.
One of the things that's really stood out to me, and it stood out early Thursday, and it's kept maintained itself throughout the weekend, is that the defensive play has been phenomenal in this tournament. There's really good defensive teams out there. They're physical. They're really good at taking you out of your stuff. So a lot of teams have had to rely on what one may call freelance, or just try to play off stuff. And a lot of teams have had success, even when defended well, of getting certain guys that they want to shoot shots late in shot clocks. They don't always making them. These are low-scoring games, but the concerted effort to still get the right shot and use multiple people on the floor to get to that shot is something that jumped out, because Carolina so often was shoot off the dribble team and shoot off the dribble when everyone else is standing around. The movement off the ball, the movement to get to looks, how screens are used, all those things really has stood out to me, that when you start applying the eye test and you look back on what I saw for 33 games for North Carolina, I understand why they're not in the tournament, David. It's not, you don't have to dig hard to say, well, maybe this is why they aren't in. It's pretty obvious when you just look at that aspect offensively.
Well, if you want to go late shot clock, there's really 2 ways to do that. Number one, you're going to run a set, which not a lot of teams do now. Everybody used to do that, but you'll see some sets run late. But the other thing is, basically you're whoever you want the ball, they just go get it and you spread the floor out and they go in isolation. And, they can do that through a ball screen. But I think more times than not, the guards would rather the big just get out of the way and let them work one-on-one. Excuse me. So I think that's one thing you're seeing a lot of with these teams. And look, it's a guards league game when you get into March and these teams get so good backcourt play. But you've got these guys. Look at Marquise Noel yesterday for Kansas State.
Yeah.
He was able to break down Kentucky by himself. And you have so many of these. Tiger Campbell, UCLA, and they run a more congested offense. They've got bigs. They've got the lane pack. But, man, he could just slither through a crack. And they're able to do that. They're able to get by their man at will. They don't settle for mid-range stuff. They're able to get all the way into the rim. They're able to draw and then hit the open guy. So, and look, North Carolina, I think R.J. Davis was a strength this year. But I still think R.J. has some of his game. He's so good in that mid-range jumper. He's not the guy that breaks down the defense and gets all the way to the rim and plays with super explosiveness and then draws the rest of the team. He shoots a lot of contested mid-range shots. He's good with that step back. He's really good at even in isolation, just dribbling the guy in. As soon as they can get him to step back, and he'll rise up and shoot that little jump shot right in the middle of the floor. And I think what you're seeing with a lot of these other guards are just guys that, are able to attack the rim. And, they're able to keep the floor spaced out enough where they're going to shoot the ball well enough where they can't pack in on the lane. If they do, they kick out for shooters. So, there are some obvious differences there.
When I asked you a few minutes ago, the first question, one of the first things that came out of your mouth was athleticism. That's something that usually North Carolina fans don't have to worry about athleticism with their team. Usually there's a almost a perfect combination of what you need athletically from the Tar Heels. But when you said athleticism, I'll hit on this after you. What did you mean? And what did you mean in relation to Carolina? Give me some examples of where you're seeing athletes excel in the tournament and advance or certainly compete versus what you saw from North Carolina this year.
Big, strong guards, more athletic at the 4 spot. Elmondo Baycott's not going to, he's big, physical. So some of those guys have those, but you just have those guys that are just freakishly athletic at the 4 spot, chiseled up, muscled up. North Carolina basically played with 2 centers on the floor this year. Leaky Black was athletic. And Caleb Love, obviously has his athleticism too, and R.J. Davis. But a lot of these teams, like I said, you just look at them. They got these big muscled up guards. And, North Carolina is a little bit leaner in that position and not as thick. But the one place I see it, though, is, and this is just the collective group, is defensively. And I think I think Duke saw that. If you look at Duke, and I'll give you an example, convey this to North Carolina. Let's go back to this Duke-Tennessee game. So I'm watching the game, and the first thing that hit me was right when it started, and they showed the starting lineups. So I've got them listed across the screen. And I remember how we used to do when we watched football, and teams ran it all the time. And you look to see how big the offensive line was. They weren't throwing it all the time. They was a running game. So you look to see how big the team's offensive line was. And you looked at those measurements. And I look at Tennessee, and their post was 265. They got wings 225. Their point guards 210, 205. And so you look at those guys and you're like, my God, their average weight to start lineup is probably about 225, 230 pounds. They're just big guys. They've been in a weight room. So, Duke comes out of the ACC and they're young. So they're freshmen. But we've not really seen anybody. I know Virginia's a little bit more physical, but they're not like that. So you don't see teams in that league with that physicality. I think it hurt ACC teams. And so you're just seeing, oh, man, it's just a scrum. And that's one thing that I'm watching the ACC this year and watching other leagues, especially the Southeastern Conference. And I think, the Big 12, they get a little bit more physical with aggression on the ball in the Big East and the Big 12, but particularly the SEC, just that physicality defensively. And, I'll hear a lot of people say, obviously I live in Tennessee, and I'll hear a lot of people talk about the referees, how bad officiating is in the SEC. And I'm like, how would you like to referee Tennessee and Arkansas? What if they gave you a whistle and said, here, call? I'd cry. And, it's an impossible job. And that's the way they play in some of these leagues. It's just impossible to call because there's so much physicality and there's so much contact, inside the arc.
Do you think ACC games are officiated in a way that the teams in the league are just built a little bit differently? And I'm going to say this, and let me preface before you answer. Someone out there saying, dude, they had 2 in the Final Four last year and 1 played for the title. They had 3 number 1 seeds 2019. I get that, but I'm also seeing a trend. Things are trending in a certain way right now that I think ACC fans, Carolina fans, because they're in the ACC, should be concerned with. So that's sort of the premise that's the basis of the question.
No, I think you look at the ACC, you look at and they play a lot of times too. You'll see a lot of stretch fours can't shoot the ball. They're long and wiry and athletic fours, and they're not necessarily great shooters, but they're springy and those type of guys. But you look across the board at a lot of these teams in the ACC, and they've just got these explosive. They're athletic and they're springy and they can jump and they can run, but they're not physically strong looking guards. I look at North Carolina State's in the tournament, man, and I'm looking at them. Their guards are skinny. And Miami's got the best team in the league, but Miami's got some small guards, but they're really, really skilled. And if you're going to be like that, man, you better be skilled, and you better be able to get that thing out in the open floor. So I'm just saying from just one weekend, just the eye test, I think the pure weight room body strength of it. I think as far as the physicality goes, I think they've fallen behind a little bit in that part of it.
Well, let's go ahead and shift gears over to the transfer portal. It's been open a week ago. It was open last Monday, and there was immediate activity at North Carolina. One surprise, one non-surprise. Well, I guess there's been 3 kids now. So 2 of them, we weren't surprised at all. We knew for a while Dontrez Styles was going to enter. Everything was pointing in that direction. And some of the schools he had spoken to previously, I was a little surprised by Tyler Nickel. I thought that he was going to have an opportunity to play a lot next year. But now as I learn more about behind the scenes with some stuff that may have led him to leave, it makes a little bit of sense. And I think Justin McCoy was going to be in the same situation at UNC next year that he was this past season. So he has another year. He's going to get his degree. Why not go somewhere and play and have fun, which I think he can excel at a lower level. So 1 weekend, and we're going to hit a couple layers of the portal here. But the first one I want you to talk about is the 3 kids that went in and just sort of your reaction to Nickel, because we had never talked about Tyler Nickel leaving until it actually popped up.
No, but, I think we did do a step back toward the end of the season when you knew it was coming down to a close the last few days when it looked like North Carolina wasn't going to get in. And I think we all started asking ourselves, okay, who could go in the portal? And to me, I was just kind of feeling like until I hear that they're coming back, that all these younger kids that weren't playing, freshmen and sophomores, and were fair game. Even getting into Jalen Washington and guys like that, you certainly hope they come back and think they will. But they're initially starting out, you're just like, okay, the playing time wasn't there. They didn't get to play. Do they try something else? And I think too, you and I have spoken about this. It's the day and age of 2023. If you're a young man, young lady, and you go into a college campus and you're on a basketball team and you're a freshman, you didn't play your freshman year, nobody thought anything about it. It was a developmental process. And, like we said, some of the best players that have ever played at North Carolina or Duke or Indiana or Kentucky or UCLA or where have you may not even got on the floor till their junior year. And, they took that time and it was understood across the board, hey, this is a process. And now that's changed and it began to change with one and done. And I know maybe Tyler Nickel and some of these guys not looking at one and done, but I think there's the expectations now that you come in, as a freshman and you don't play, well, something's wrong. And some people might even look at it as a failure. And I don't understand that, and that's not always been the case. People didn't used to think that, it's just a developmental stage and folks understood it. But now it's just like everything else. It's a microwave society. And, you've got to have everything right now. You've got to play right now. You've got to have time right now. Fans got to have results right now. The media, we've got to have results right now. So, I think it's just the day and age we live.
Some of the stuff that I've heard over the last week, and this is not specific to Tyler Nichols, so don't take, and I hope nobody takes it that way at all. It's just some of the chirping that we have gathered as a staff is that some of the concerns that some of the kids that still have eligibility remaining that their parents have, and maybe the kids may have as well, is that in some cases there was not as much accountability as they would want. For example, you've got a guy that's missing a ton of shots out there, and he's just in the middle of one of those bad games, and there are no signs of him coming out. Why not try somebody else? In Nichols' case, the all-time leading scorer in Virginia prep history, I know he played at a small level, but the dude could play. He showed that out throughout his high school career and in AAU and stuff like that. A lot of there's some concern about that. There's some concern about the system, the offensive system, and how it's not what UNC used to be. And I think a lot of people, they think of UNC being what it's been for so long, and they're enamored and they want to go there. But the offense sort of took a form this year that did not appeal to a lot of people. So some of the concern isn't just how much a kid played this year. It's how much will he play next year, depending on who comes and who goes, but also what kind of system is he going to play in? And so I think that sometimes these decisions are made strictly based on playing time, or maybe there's a homesickness situation, or the kids that are pretty good, maybe there's an NIL reason for leaving. I think that there is a little bit of concern about the offensive system at North Carolina, which has been very well documented and frequently discussed here in other realms of sites and networks that cover North Carolina.
The feedback that I've gotten from speaking to maybe recruits and players, families, and things like that, if there was any knock, it would be like, they need to run more. Why are they not running? And so I think that was probably a question. I know you've said several instances that you saw that were noticeable were when Coach Davis put them out of fast break situations to call set.
Yeah.
And, they're wanting to run the ball. So, that's the big thing that I see is just there was no transition. Games like North Carolina State, if that's the one I remember correctly at Raleigh, there were 0 fast break points. So they went through a lot of that where they just knew North Carolina used to be, you got the ball out of the net. And I remember when I first started getting into coaching, the one epiphany that I had was, hey, if you get that ball out of the net, go. You've got and a lot of young coaches did back then. You've got a primary break and a secondary break, and that was based off Dean Smith. You can beat other teams down the floor. You don't have to have all these sets and try to figure out what kind of game plan you're going to have offensively. And then it's free flowing. You go from the primary break to secondary break and the early offense and then the wrinkles that you want to do. So, yeah, that's something that I've gotten away from most definitely. The one thing that I see with them is the big thing we were talking about the players, the bench. I made this point in our mailbag we just did. the bench is always for a coach, the great equalizer. And you take these stretches when guys are not making shots, when guys are not playing hard, and all of a sudden, you can do two things here. Number one, you get player A's his attention, and secondly, you can get player B some playing time. So, you kill two birds with one stone right there. And Hubert's thing has been, okay, and it's been constant for 2 years. We're going to let players play through their mistakes. Recruits like it, okay, so it helps on the recruiting trail. And it paid off in 2022. It didn't pay off in 2023. But the one thing that happens when you let players play through that is your guys on the bench not going to come in much. Well, so-and-so's missed so many shots. Well, I don't want him to lose his confidence, so I'm going to leave him in. Well, your kid over here on the bench is not going to get in. He's going to lose his confidence. So, there's that catch-22 that I see. So, and let's face it, his group his first year, that starting five was called the Iron Five. So you've got that, and then he's caught more flack this year because the success wasn't there of not going to the bench. But, that's something that's been a constant over 2 years. And I'll go back quickly. I'm watching Arkansas and Kansas Saturday, I think it was. And Nick Smith, who was probably figured to be the best offensive perimeter, in the country coming in as a freshman. Of course, that's Brandon Miller now, but Nick Smith would still be in the top 2 or 3. Phenomenal player. So Arkansas was on a pretty good roll, and Nick Smith had blown out a knee, or at least had ACL problems. I don't think blown up, but there were knee problems. Anyway, he comes back in, I don't know, 10 or 12 games left to go the season. They kind of went in the funk because he was shooting the ball 20, 25 times a game. And it was also affecting chemistry because the guy who had been in his role went to another role, and then that guy goes to another role, and that guy goes to another role. So you've got some issues there, and they're not playing well. Well, I noticed in the first half, Eric Musselman really got after him on 2 different occasions. One for not running back on defense and not defending, and the other one was just there was a loose ball on the floor, and he just didn't do anything. Got outworked. Musselman set him on the bench. And I think it was Debo Davis that fouled out. If Debo Davis hadn't fouled out, Nick Smith wouldn't have got back in. And, and then we're talking about a 17, 18 minute session over there on the bench.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking if Arkansas can survive this game and beat Kansas, I want to see where they go from here because I think there's some buy-in now from Nick Smith. Musselman's made his point. I watched Smith on the bench. He was up supporting his team. I guarantee you he'll play harder the next time. So, just taking all that consideration, Musselman used his bench and to make the point that needed to be made. And I expected to have positive ramifications from there.
He's also showing some scouts something that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have seen. How does he respond to this will be very interesting. Yeah. Perfect example of what you're talking about with an older player. Because some people say, well, you can't really do that to older players, but you can. And I go back to December 2015 at Barclays Center in the CBS Sports Classic when Carolina was playing UCLA. It was the first time they wore the black uniform, so a lot of fans will probably recall that. And Bryce Johnson was not playing well. And there was a sequence in the first half where he got outworked and he allowed a couple of putbacks, and Roy just went nuts. And he pulled him from the game. And Bryce comes over to the bench and he's flailing and yelling. He sits down, he's cussing at the end of the bench. Usually you come sit like next to Steve Robinson or something like that. And Roy just leaves him there, never looks at him. And he sits for about 9 minutes, 10 minutes. And Carolina just started getting it going. They started playing a little bit better, kind of regrouped a little bit. And Roy later put him back in, and Bryce went nuts in the game. I think he went like 27 and 15 or something like that. And that's when his streak, the rest of his senior year, took off. He was really good inconsistently up to that point, and after that point, he just took off like a rocket. I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, he had his 39-23 game at Florida State, and he led them to a national championship game. They were right there. They lost to the buzzer, one of the greatest finishes ever in a national championship game. So there's an example of a guy who was an entrenched starter, a guy who was the best player on that team. I say so more than Marcus Page was, and yet Roy still made an example of him. And he made an example of him on national TV in New York against UCLA. He wasn't afraid in that situation to pull him and make an example and to teach him one more lesson. Sometimes one time doesn't do it. You have to do it a third, a fourth, and a fifth time. And Roy was so good at understanding what his guys could handle, and he knew ultimately Bryce could handle that, and it would channel him the right way, and it did. So we'll see with Nick Smith later this week what that can do. I just gave a perfect example what happened with one of Carolina's better players in the last 10, 15 years and where it worked. And I think that's one thing that was missing from Hubert this season, which is now affecting him somewhat with concerns about kids entering the portal, but also moving forward. If a guy chooses to come back, what are they being told, and what were they told a year ago, and how much did that come to fruition? I'm not saying they were told something that didn't come to fruition, but maybe there was, because Hubert's still learning how to communicate as a head coach. He's still learning the nuances of that job that he has, which is why I've said multiple times this year, we need to give him a little bit of grace. But it's an extraordinarily important part of the job, especially now when kids can just up and go, and you could lose your whole roster in a finger snap. So I think that that's something of anything, and we're kind of channeling a little bit more toward Hubert now, of the things that need to improve with Hubert Davis as a coach, David. I would say that's it, because the communication with us, and my understanding is some of the communication with the kids, and we could see that when there is no accountability held during the course of games with guys like Caleb going 0 for 9.5. Got to sit him, let him watch. Sometimes it's good for them to catch their breath, take a look. And if you communicate to him the right way, he's not going to lose his confidence. He's going to understand he's just one of 18 guys on that roster. It's his turn to sit because someone else needs to see if they can get the job done.
Yeah, and, I watched several coaches in this tournament that are like that. It's funny. I'll give you Rick Barnes, for example. They were asking players about name 3 things that Rick Barnes would say. What's his sayings? And the first one was, if you don't guard, you don't play. And I think we've all kind of said we watch, from games on TV for our teams, from games that we have, they're the teams that we pull for. We're involved. We have an emotional attachment there. So we sit and watch them at TV from a young age, and you're like, get that player out of there. My dad used to be all the time. Put him on the bench, get him out. You catch yourself doing it all the time. If you're watching on TV, get him out. And a lot of coaches, the substitution patterns are based on rotations, and this player comes out at this time, and this player comes out at this time. But I can watch a guy like Rick Barnes, and you'll watch some guy get beat off a dribble, and I'm like, well, he's coming out. Well, sure enough, here comes somebody dropping to the table. Next dead ball, he's out. And he may sit out for 20 minutes because he got beat off a dribble. But, they know they don't want to get beat off a dribble. But the thing is that consistency, it doesn't go for one guy and not go for another. And they understand if he says, if you have a defensive breakdown and you don't defend, you won't play, he doesn't backtrack from it. He's consistent with that. And I think if players know that, they appreciate it. And it's funny, a lot of these coaches that are like that will come back and you'll hear the players say, I used to hate him, but now I love him. And I think there's a lot that goes on with that. Eddie Fogler, a North Carolina great, who I thought was a tremendous coach. I saw him at a clinic when he was coaching at Vanderbilt. And he said his favorite part about coaching was to take a high school freshman who came in and thought he knew about everything about basketball and basically have him in tears after about 15 minutes when he figures out he doesn't know anything about it. He said that was his favorite part, building them up and developing the player from there. And initially that player probably hated him, but you can't. And we don't know this, but you can't always be that buddy as a head coach. So you've got to make tough decisions. That's why you're in that. That's why he scooted down 18 inches when Roy retired. So yeah, you've got to make tough decisions. You've got to make tough decisions about people you love that are very close to you, and that's the same way as a parent. And Hubert talks a lot about that parent figure, that parent role. It's part of parenting, man. Sometimes you got to make the tough calls, and in basketball, that belongs to the head coach.
If I'm going to ask you to create 3 boxes that must be checked between now and the start of next season for Hubert's approach. So everything they basically do, from the drop coverage to the soft switching to the running so many sets, all those other things, it's all his fingerprint, his DNA all over the team. So if there are 3 boxes that you think must be checked, in other words, tweaked or altered, changed, ditched entirely, what would those boxes be?
Now, are you talking about his philosophy or type of players?
Yeah, the players are the players. What we've seen so far, I mean, if he got in five-star top 10 kids, he might do something a little bit different, but he still has had talent. What we've seen him do for 2 years, especially this year, his second year, from the sets we were talking about earlier, they don't rip and run, even after made baskets. They used to put pressure on teams after made baskets by getting runouts. I will direct everybody to 2019 ACC tournament semifinals, the Cam Johnson dunk, fast break dunk right after a Duke basket, late in the second half of that game. That was amazing. And that was vintage Roy Williams basketball. Running the overuse of the sets, not enough motion freelance, anything that you want to pick at. The way they played defense, I know you've talked about drop coverage in the past, and they iced a lot more, I think, last year than they did this year. Just whatever if you're a basketball coach, so what are some things that you've seen, 3 boxes that you think that you would like to see checked by the time next season starts for the way they go about things?
The first thing would be able, and I think a lot of these teams that are playing now can really do it that are alive, and that's put pressure on the ball defensively and in the passing lanes without just getting torn apart with the ball handler going to the rim. Being that I'm not talking about getting out to the half line, but I just think when you get to Garden with 19-9 and all that, and we've seen North Carolina, it just gets like you're going through the motions and the energy wanes and all that. And they don't dictate terms on a defensive end. A lot of these teams are really good at that are still alive and still playing. So that would be the one thing that I would see, man, that they're active, they're down in the stance, they're up in a ball handler's chest, they're one pass away, they're in the passing lanes, they're sprinting to help. You've got all that activity defensively. It's not something I see, so that would be one. I think they'll run more, and you've touched on that, and we've talked about it offensively. Running more in the break, running more in the secondary break. They need to up their transition points if they could do it 8 to 10 points a game, and just get into that early offense. And that would be another thing, I guess, that I would say, and some people may not think about this, but being able to transition from fast break to your half court offense. And you say, I don't see that as much right now as I used to see it with Roy. And I've talked about it on here on the show before, that it used to amaze me how he could do that, how the guys knew they could go from the Carolina break to a set and not have to stop and set it up.
Yeah.
Go quick, then reset, and go again. It was just like one fluid motion from one end to another. And I don't see as much of that now. It's like, that's one thing they've gotten away from. If they do push the ball and they don't have anything, they're pulling it back out and they're running to a spot, or jogging or walking to a spot or whatever, and it just kills the flow. So I would like to see push the ball and then just seamlessly get into your early offense and into your half court stuff.
The last point that you made about the offense is something I've been ever since the first Duke game, when I asked a couple players afterward about it. And they were very open about the set plays and what happens when the set plays snuffed out and they have to go into freelance. And that's one area this team really struggled in. They didn't play well off each other when stuff broke down. And what you were talking about with Roy, they would settle right into freelance, but they knew how to play off of one another. A lot of times it would look like it was an orchestrated play because they were so good at moving and feeling one another and playing off of one another. The head up, awareness, recognition, and completing the plays. And I would like to, as a basketball person, and I would say to my friends who are Carolina fans, I would want to see them get much better at when things break down. Because when the first set is snuffed out and the second option in the set, the third option, you never get to it, that's when this team at times looks horrible offensively. They don't know how to react when what they're told to do is no longer an option there for them. And that's something, when they had the practices in the summer, they get 10 in the middle of the summer. To me, that's what I would be doing. You guys got to learn how to play off each other. Whoever's there on the roster, learn motion offense, motion freelance. That's what Roy called it. It was a freelance offense with the elements of motion. And you saw that a lot. That's how you saw those high assist rates when he's calling maybe 6 set plays the entire game. His younger teams, he called more set plays. His older teams, he just let them go because they knew what to do because they'd worked on it over and over and over and over.
You know, I'm careful to call it freelance because I think sometimes people look at it as something derisive, like it's just you're playing shirts and skins at City Park, and it's not that. I've had a lot of opportunities, to sit down with guys that play college coaches over the years that play more of a high octane offense, and even like with Nate Oates, every time I see him out on the recruiting trail on AU tournaments, I just sit with him for a while and pick his brain on some stuff. And like, for example, I'm just watching it the other day. If an Alabama guard goes baseline and they always play their big opposite, they don't play their big on the ball side. So they play their big opposite. If the guard drives baseline, that big feels to the front of the rim. That's his spot, the 5.
Yeah.
He plays to the front. He sits right to the front of the rim. So that guard knows where he's at. It's not an accident. I saw him make a couple of dishes in the last game that they played against Maryland. And I'm sitting there watching it. And I said, well, it's right where he's supposed to be. So if you looked at that, people wouldn't think anything about it. They just think, well, this guy drove, this guy moved, and he hit him. But there's tendencies to all this stuff, and there's rules to it. So I would like it's like NBA. NBA looks like freelance, but it's not. I mean, there's the ball movement. They know what their player movement. They know where they're supposed to be off a drive. One thing I've noticed in watching games live this year is the post doubles when they're made, how the backside guards are rotating to it. If they're in tandem, they're moving together and to get into open spots. So that it's not just a thing where you're saying, okay, let's play pickup. That you've got the rules, you've got your tendencies. The other thing I would say would be, I just still think it's hard to do it when you've got a big in front of the bucket. It's just hard to do it. Well, big posting up. And last year, I can't say it enough. I really think the structure of it, of the roster building, was a big issue. You had 2 centers on the floor. And look, I'll admit, a year ago, I was saying, hey, Pete Nance needs to be the guy. And I was wrong too. But and I don't think, looking at others, the player from Baylor was one that a lot of people were looking at. And I think he struggled this year really shooting the ball. But they basically had 2 5s on the floor. And it's just hard to do all that late clock when you can't stretch it. We've talked about it. Caleb said it when Roy Williams was here. I say it now when Hubert Davis is here. Caleb Love's got to have space. And it's hard to do late in the clock to get something creative when the lane's jammed.
Let's close tonight going back to the portal, since you just brought it up about about Pete and so what are their needs? Obviously, before you answer, we don't know all the openings they're going to have. We have a pretty fair idea. We were surprised about nickel, as I mentioned early on in the show, but we have a pretty decent idea about what else is going to happen. I think they need a 3 and a 4, and I wouldn't say it's a bad thing if they went out and got a backup 5, someone that could play in the post, would be comfortable. I call it the Justin Knox role. Justin Knox played at Alabama. I'm sure you remember him. And he graduated in 3 years and grad transferred to Carolina for the 2011 season. And he was very content playing 10, 12 minutes a game off the bench. When we got down to the NCAA tournament, they got to regional final that year, was about 8 minutes. There are guys out there that will do that. Duke showed it this year with Ryan Young and with Grandison. I think someone like that could play, that could back up in the post some, is someone they need to get. And obviously a 3 that can be a threat to score. No disrespect to Leaky, David. I'm a big Leaky guy. I personally like him a lot. But they haven't had a wing that could score since 2019.
And that's one thing I was talking about, not having space. They weren't guarding. People were staying on. Then Nance got to where he couldn't shoot. Now you've got 2 guys that are not guarding. So they're just
and then Armando is not a mobile piece down there. So even with what Hubert was trying to do, maybe he called so many set plays because he was trying to get those pieces to move in a way that maybe they naturally weren't doing. But they haven't had a 3 that could score since Cam Johnson. And his senior year, they were number 1 seed. So that's not a coincidence. They need a 4 who can shoot, a 4 who could space, and who can be who could be a part of what they do. But they need scoring from the wing. That's one thing that you see. You got to get points from wing to wing, in my opinion. Certainly the baseline's good and the corner's good, but this team had trouble getting enough production from its efforts from wing to wing this season. And they need to elevate that efficiency out there.
Yeah. And, they've already, the first places that they've looked at, is a shooter 2 spot. We've seen that places they've and we don't know how serious they are, but about some of these guys. But, if Arkansas is serious about every guy that they've looked at out transfer portal, they'll have 85 players next year. So it's, you take that with a grain of salt. But it does look like, though, they've already looked at several players at the 2 who are less athletic, but are just tremendous knockdown shooters. And I think we all know that they need more from that. Now, I don't think that would be a guy in a starting role, but I do think it's a specialist. We know they've got to get more athletic, so you don't need to bring in a set shooter, in to be your starting 2 at North Carolina. But like I said, I do think that's a guy that comes off the bench and provides a role. I think the 3, I don't see anybody on the roster right now that really just makes me giddy when I look at the 3 spot, upcoming. So I think, I think you look there. I think they definitely need to get athletic, but they need a guy who can shoot. They were athletic at the 3 last year, and Leaky was a winner. Leaky made winning plays, but they got to have more shooting out there. The 4 spot or the power forward, here's the question. I think a lot of us wonder if Brady Manick, is going to, if he is that guy now, if he's the model for the 4, because I feel like some of us, maybe myself included, he is, because there was so much success. But I'd like to know what Hubert Davis's model is for the 4. Is he going out looking for a Brady Manick every year? Does he want a more athletic guy, more of a Skywalker, a big physical guy who can step out and shoot? What does he want? Because Nance didn't make shots, but Nance didn't fill that athletic void either. So you got that. So I'm curious to see which way he would go. Like I said, do you stretch, or you just look for that guy like he came out of the Muscle Fitness magazine, at the 4. And then finally, like you say, they can't have enough depth at the 5. So, you're obviously looking for a guy who can spell some time there. I would say for Baycott, I would say this: the one guy that I really look at that I think a lot of us are looking at that didn't play as much last year was a freshman is Jalen Washington, because when Hubert Davis says he's the best big man shooter I've ever seen, well, that catches your attention. So, if that's the case, is he athletic? And we still don't know yet because we've not seen enough. Is he athletic enough at the 4? I see a lot of these teams, the way they play, man, the way they stretch the floor and how quickly they play. Guys like Jalen Washington are playing the 5. I think most people think he's a 4, but a lot of these teams have a guy like him in that 5 role, and then they're going smaller at that 4, quicker, and they got a lot of shooters around. So I'd like to see what his philosophy would be on a couple of those positions.
I was going to ask you that because I'll yield to you on this one. Of the 16 teams remaining, how many of them have a Brady Manic-esque 4? I think people are so fixated on Brady because everybody liked him. He stood out. The fire, the way he played late, he meant obviously a lot to the club last year. But a 4 that works comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes and a lot of different qualities. It looks to me like there are a lot of long 3s playing 4. And that might be good enough, especially if you have a monster like Baycott down there, who, by the way, as I sidebar for just a brief moment, he showed a lot of improvements for the first few months of the season from a year earlier. A lot more decisive spin moves and drop steps to the basket. But when everybody started doubling the crap out of him because he didn't have to guard other guys, and because they knew the sets that Carolina was running, they became very predictable. His production obviously dropped. But if he's the only guy down there and the dude that would double him has to worry about a 3/4 in the corner, that makes things a lot different. And I just think when I look at these teams that are there are a lot of 4s that are really 3s. And it works now in college basketball. Hell, Miami center is 6'7". He can play the interior. He can grab rebounds. He averages 4 offensive rebounds a game, but he's comfortable 25 feet away from the basket too.
Yeah, I think the way you do it, I think you recruit 3s, big 3s, and beef them up a little bit and then put them at the 4, and then do the same thing from the 4 to the center. We've had this discussion before. You may not remember it, but I talked about football. Jimmy Johnson started all that stuff. He recruited safeties, moved them linebackers. He moved his linebackers to defensive line. His less athletic defensive lineman moved to offensive lineman, and they just really rethought the way you evaluate players and talent. And I think it's the same way. I've always thought that. Now I try to go back and think about roster build up, makeup, things that I would do and all that. But I agree with you 100%. If you look at now, a perfect world is what Alabama's got. If you've got a 6'9" guy, like Miller out there who is Kevin Durant 2.0 at times. But you talk about he's playing the 3. Now, you talk about the stretch guys. Alabama's got one in Noah Clowney, who's about 6'10", 6'11", can sit out there and stroke it, and is athletic and switch and guard positions. And so you'll have a guy like that. I'm trying to think and go through some teams, that they've really got some 4s that can step out. Kansas State, on the other hand, goes small and play Keontae Johnson, who played the 3 at Florida, and now he's playing the 4 at Kansas State, depending on the lineup. But in the starting lineup, he's playing the 4 at 6'6". I think he shoots like 43% from 3. So you see some of those guys, and then other teams you see that don't stretch as much. Tennessee won't stretch, obviously. Arkansas won't stretch. So, I don't see Miami's big stretches as much this year as they did. So, excuse me. It's a different makeup, but you're right about that. The one thing I don't see, none of these teams have 2 big guys that can't move. Yeah. If they do have 2 bigs on the court, man, they can move, they can run, they can step out. Kansas State had a very good 6'10" guy they brought off a bench. He's a sophomore from Harlem. I can't remember his name. He may be the to have the highest upside of anybody on that team. They would bring him in off the bench. He's not necessarily a good shooter, but he'd step out there and just, blow by you on the floor of his dribble 6'10". So, those kind of guys like that, if they are big, they can move and they got some mobility.
There's going to be a lot going on in the portal here really for a while, and we will be on top of it. If you want David's insight, his information nuggets, and everything else, you've got to be a subscriber. That's how we make all this stuff happen. We don't work for free. We've got to be able to pay the bills, and David's stuff is on our boards every day. It's just $8.33 a month. We have a lot of lines in the water right now, trying to figure out exactly what's going on with the current roster and with some of the kids that might be coming in. It's amazing, David, how the recruiting season for the portal has completely changed what we do once basketball season ends and there's spring football going on. I never thought anything after the basketball games were over could overshadow a spring football, but this stuff does, because there's an element of excitement to it, because lots of guys get a new lease on life. We see teams all throughout the tournament, all the 16 teams remaining for the most part, all of them actually, I guess, have dudes from somewhere else. Dudes that started somewhere else. They got a new lease on life, and they're coming from small schools. They're coming from other Power Fives, like you mentioned, Keontae Johnson making a fairly lateral move from Florida to Kansas State, and they're finding a new lease on life somewhere else, a better fit somewhere else. Those guys are out there. And it's going to be really interesting to see who Hubert identifies as guys he really wants. So we'll know when those offers are made. And also, how many of those kids look at what they could see from North Carolina over the last 12 months and say, I want to be a part of that too. That's going to be fascinating. And North Carolina next season could be a very, very different team and a much better team because of what happens here in the next few weeks. Or there might be some ugly realities that surface, and it might be more of the same at Carolina.
Yeah, we're going to see. And, I know guys like Colin Cowherd always say that, July, if you're in sports media, July is like the worst time of the year. You don't have anything. Everybody's waiting for football, but the NBA free agency moved it to July. Now, he says, that's the biggest sports stories in July is NBA free agency, in the middle of summer. And, it sounds crazy. So you look at that now, this is basically what we've got now. College basketball free agency, and it's a huge story.
Well, there will be more movement, so make sure you come to TarHeelIllustrated.com for all of your inside nuggets about that movement, and we always offer perspective about what does it mean. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. We appreciate you stopping by.